Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect these rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers, because taxpayers have a right to know what they get from their government. It's our job to work tirelessly in partnership with citizen watchdogs to deliver the facts to the American people and bring genuine reform to the Federal bureaucracy. Our committee's resources are limited, but in one area we have focused for more than 6 years, and that is taking drugs and dangerous substances out of professional sports. We do so on a bipartisan basis, and we do so because, in fact, what professional sports do is what collegiate sports do, and it's what children aspire to do. We cannot take professional sports in isolation, because ultimately it trickles down to the youngest. When we began our work on a bipartisan basis on steroids in baseball, steroids had become common at the high school level. Today, I believe it is dramatically reduced but not eliminated. On their own, with some push from Congress, the National Football League signed a historic union agreement that banned human growth hormone from professional football. They did so with a time limit that would have, in fact, put it in play last season. We are now finishing this season, and no such implementation has occurred. This committee, under Ranking Member Cummings and myself, has met on multiple occasions with the parties, encouraged them to work out their differences, and supported each of their agreements to try to bring the contract into compliance. We are here today because, in fact, it hasn't happened, because America is watching, and because both the Ranking Member and myself are personally concerned that the injuries, particularly head injuries, that continue to plague professional sports, at the professional football, and all football played at all levels, in no small part is based on the strength of the players hitting each other. Human growth hormones can, in fact, and we will hear testimony to this extent, be a part of this. It is a tough sport when played honestly by people of good, solid training and physical conditioning. We need not make it tougher or more dangerous by the use of banned substances. This committee is here today to hear from the parties who can, in fact, help us with the science, and from one well-known player who knows the science personally as it impacted on him time and time again. It is our hope that this hearing will move the parties closer together, or at least have the American people clearly understand that, in fact, it needs to happen, that much of the science has been not just done but redone in support of it happening, and that if we are to have the kind of clean game that Americans love, this has to be an element of the testing. So with that, I want to thank all of our witnesses, but I particularly want to thank the Ranking Member. This has been one of those examples in which there's not only been bipartisan behavior, but there's been completely nonpartisan behavior. Never have we had a closer tie than the Ranking Member and I have on this issue, and I want to thank him for his leadership and yield.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your words, and I agree with you totally. I want to make sure that the League understands this, that our players understand this, that the union understands this. There is no daylight, in the words of the Chairman, between his position and mine. This is a bipartisan effort, and I am very delighted that it is, because I think it's so very important. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all of our witnesses for being here. Today's hearing is not only about the NFL, and it's not only about human growth hormone. This hearing is about millions of young people throughout this country in high school and college who look up to professional athletes, and the lengths to which these young people go to emulate their role models. Let me tell you about some of the young people in my district 40 miles away from here in Baltimore, many of whom come from very challenging backgrounds. and from very difficult home situations. They have dreams about making it as lawyers, engineers, teachers, and maybe even a congressman. I've seen their smiling faces at graduation. I see them on the bus stops at 6 o'clock in the morning trying to get to practice. I see them coming home late from practice. They tell me about burning the late hours doing homework, dead tired. They're dedicated, they're smart, and they have amazing potential. But that word potential is a very significant word. I've often said that our children are the living messages we send to a future we will never see. The question is whether we will send them there with diabetes, will we send them there with heart disease, will we send them there with mental problems. Some of these young people dream about becoming ball players and succeeding beyond their wildest expectations. And when they see a freshman become the Heisman Trophy winner, they feel that is within reach. When I meet these young people, I share the same advice my parents gave me. That is, there are no shortcuts in life. If they want to become a successful entrepreneur, best-selling author, or Pro Bowl linebacker for the Baltimore Ravens, they have to put in the work to reach their goals. But when they see their role models in sports using illegal drugs to try to get an edge, and when they see the professional leagues looking the other way, refusing to test and going easy on abusers, they start thinking they need to use these substances just to compete. And so that there will be no confusion, I must credit Commissioner Goodell for his efforts, not only with regard to protecting players, but he has also been one who has been pushing to make sure that this happens. And she said that to Chairman and I want to make sure that's clear, that he has been very adamant about this. These young people, they start thinking and they have high expectations, and they're reaching. HGH is a dangerous drug with both short-term and long-term risks. Let me read just a few of the negative health effects of HGH. Hypertension, diabetes, arthritis, bone spurs, spinal stenosis, disfigurement, and cardiac dysfunction. These come directly from a scientific journal article published in April of this year. Mr. Chairman, I ask that this study be placed into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you very much. There's no serious dispute in the scientific community that the test to detect HGH abuse is effective. This test, which has been in place for the past decade, is actually designed to be conservative in order to avoid false positives. As one of our witnesses will testify today, you are more likely to get struck by lightning than to get a false positive on an HGH test. There's also no dispute that on August 4th, as the Chairman has said, 2011, more than a year ago, the NFL Players Association entered into a contract to begin testing NFL players for HGH, quote, by the first week of the 2011 regular season, end of quote. As we all know, that season passed without any HGH testing, and now the 2012 season will also pass without it. Despite their commitment, lawyers for the Players Association now say they do not trust the HGH test. Although it has been used for years on Olympic athletes, Major League Baseball players, and a host of other athletes, they argue that the NFL players are somehow different. They claim that their bodies are not the same as wrestlers, runners, weightlifters, and thousands of other athletes who are tested regularly. They say they need more time to study this issue before doing what they agreed to do. To me, it seems obvious that the Players Association is simply running out the clock. Although they agreed to HGH testing, they are now trying to back out of the contract. Well, today we will have the opportunity to hear directly from medical experts, and we will examine the claims of the Players Association under the bright light of science. Finally, let me address one point that has been raised, which is why Congress is getting involved in this issue. I'm sure the Chairman agrees with me that this dispute should be resolved by the NFL and the Players Association. We wish it could be or would be. They have a contract, and they should honor it. But when they refuse to do so, that sends exactly the wrong message to the kids we have sworn to protect. And that is when it becomes our business. Finally, on a personal level, I've worked on this issue for most of my life in public service. I've helped with the formation of a group in Baltimore in 2007 called Powered by Me. That has reached more than 30,000 young athletes, coaches, and parents, warning them about the dangers of these substances. The group's director, Mike Gimble, has spearheaded efforts to prevent young athletes from being brainwashed by the mantra of, quote, winning at all costs. I'm very thankful he is testifying today. And again, Mr. Chairman, I cannot tell you how grateful I am to you and the cooperation that we have had on this issue, and I'm looking forward to moving forward. And there's another thing that keeps coming up, Mr. Chairman, and you may address this later on. People just, I keep being asked the question, well, why are you just having the experts here today? Why don't you have the NFL and the players? And I've told people, and you can expound on this later, I guess, that this may be very well the first of several hearings, and that we wanted to get the science out and the effect that it's having on our young people. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for your courtesy, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I might note I'm not recognizing the only football player here on the dais, but that was only because my understanding is they threw a flag any time he was hit during
Yeah, point of clarification. I was a place kicker, not an actual football player, so.
All the more reason not to recognize him.
Thank you. We'll go win the game at the end. But
And since we're being very bipartisan, I want to remind the ranking member that we share the Baltimore Ravens since I was born and raised in Cleveland. The chair, yeah, it was cold. You can keep Modell, though. We now welcome our witnesses. Mr. Dick Butkus, an NFL Hall of Famer who leads the organization I Play Clean, which encourages student athletes to play sports without performance-enhancing drugs. Welcome. Dr. Larry Bowers is the Chief Science Officer of the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, very important to today's hearing. Dr. Larry Tabak is the Deputy Director of the National Institute of Health and an expert in this field. Mr. Mike Gimble is Director of Powered by Me at St. Joseph Medical Center, and Dr. Lynn Goldberg is Head of the Division of Health Performance and Sports Medicines and Director of the Human Performance Laboratory at the Oregon Health Science University. Pursuant to our committee rules, and because we absolutely want people to know that we treat everyone equally, would you please all rise to take the oath? And raise your right hands. This is the photo moment you've all waited for. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Please be seated. Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. As the ranking member said, today really is about the science and a lead-in to what will, if necessary, be a series of hearings until, in fact, this issue is resolved. So there's full panel. I'd ask that since your entire opening statements will be placed in the record, that if you run short of time, as the former chairman used to say, you know, it's green, we know that means go. Yellow, that means go real fast through the intersection, and stop means don't run it anymore. So if you'll come as close to that 5 minutes as possible, we'd appreciate it. Dr. Tabak.
Good morning, Chairman Issa, Ranking Member.
Oh, the other thing is that these microphones, in order not to get people behind you into the conversation, you have to get them as close as possible. Thank you.
Well, again, good morning, Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Cummings, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm here today to describe our understanding of the state of the science pertaining to the non-medical use of recombinant human growth hormone, which I'll refer to as HGH, including its adverse effects, and to discuss the prevailing method for detecting illicit use of recombinant HGH in professional sports. HGH is a natural product of the pituitary gland with essential roles in human development. Much of our current understanding about the physiological and psychological effects of HGH on the human body comes from decades of studying and treating patients suffering from growth hormone disorders. NIH has a long history of supporting breakthrough research to understand and treat the often devastating effects of deficient or excessive function of the growth hormone system. Human growth hormone therapies became a mainstay of modern medicine, particularly after development in 1985 of a safe and reliable source of recombinant HGH, a synthetic protein produced by DNA technology that has a sequence identical to that of the primary pituitary-derived HGH. HGH can stimulate tissue growth, linear growth, and metabolism. It promotes fat loss and increases lean body mass. The FDA has approved recombinant HGH for a number of clinical indications associated with growth hormone deficiency in both adults and children. In patients with growth hormone deficiency, recombinant HGH administration improved aspects of exercise capacity, and some studies have suggested that it improves mood. Given the well-documented ability of recombinant HGH to spur tissue buildup and burn fat, some athletes began abusing recombinant HGH in an attempt to enhance their performance. Further increasing the appeal for competitive athletes is the fact that it also stimulates the production of another hormone, insulin-like growth factor 1, that inhibits breakdown of proteins. There are claims that inhibiting protein breakdown can help prevent some of the muscle-intended damage that results from the chronic abuse of anabolic steroids. This effect is unproven, but it may explain why recombinant HGH is often used in combination with anabolic steroids at high doses for several months, a phenomenon that is bound to complicate our understanding of any potential consequences of the non-medical use of recombinant HGH. Studies performed to date have found little or no evidence that increased lean body mass that can result from using unnaturally high doses of recombinant HGH have any effects on boosting strength, power, or aerobic capacity in healthy individuals. Non-medical use of recombinant HGH might actually decrease performance by increasing exercise-induced buildup of lactic acid in muscles, which promotes muscular fatigue, cramps, and soreness. Based on well-documented evidence of the side effects of recombinant HGH administration to adults with growth hormone deficiency, athletes who abuse recombinant HGH are putting themselves at serious risk. Although much of what we know about the adverse effects associated with high-dose recombinant HGH abuse is derived from individual case reports, anecdotal evidence, or therapeutic records, what we know about the biology of recombinant HGH and the long clinical history of treating patients with it points to a worrisome list of possible adverse consequences, including development of some of the features of acromegaly, as well as risks for developing hypoglycemia, diabetes, cardiomyopathy, drug-induced hepatitis, renal failure, soft tissue edema, joint pain, carpal tunnel syndrome, and increased fatigue. The available information suggests that athletes who dose themselves with recombinant HGH are taking serious risks with their health and may not realize that there is no scientific evidence that the practice will improve their performance or resilience in competition. Knowledge of the potentially adverse health consequences associated with recombinant HGH abuse has prompted efforts to develop and deploy a sensitive, reliable method for testing of the illicit use. The development of a test provided some formidable challenge, but these technical obstacles have been overcome with the development of several testing approaches. And I see the time is up, and I will stop at this point.
Thank you, and thanks for being such a good steward of time. Dr. Bowers.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Dr. Larry Bowers. I'm the Chief Science Officer of the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to testify about the science behind growth hormone testing. I've been involved in the development of tests for the abuse of growth hormones since 1999. I was the director of the Athletic Drug Testing and Toxicology Laboratory at Indiana University, at the time one of only 2 International Olympic Committee testing laboratories in the U.S. USADA has been recognized by Congress as the independent national anti-doping agency for Olympic, Paralympic, and Pan American sport in the United States. USADA's mission is to protect and preserve the health of athletes, the integrity of competition, and the well-being of sport through the elimination of doping. Since its inception, USADA has been an advocate for clean athletes. When Congress approved the medical use of growth hormone, the law expressly stated that it was only to be distributed for conditions specifically authorized by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, making potentially dangerous off-label uses, such as performance enhancement, illegal. The isoform growth hormone test has been developed by well-respected researchers in the growth hormone research community. It is a blood test that has been used to detect the prohibited use of growth hormone on a limited basis since 2004 and on a worldwide basis since 2008. The test measures the ratio of the form of growth hormone found in recombinant or synthetic products to other forms of growth hormone that are naturally released by the pituitary gland. The ratio is independent of the amount of growth hormone in the blood. You're just as likely to have a ratio of 0.8 at low concentrations of growth hormone as you are to have a ratio of 0.8 at high concentrations of growth hormone. When you take recombinant synthetic growth hormone, the ratio increases dramatically. The method's been the subject of 4 peer-reviewed publications, has been the subject of numerous conferences and working group meetings that have involved growth hormone experts. WADA has been given the responsibility for harmonizing and approving tests by the World Anti-Doping Code and the UNESCO Convention, which was approved by Congress. A very conservative threshold or decision limit was established for this isoforms test. The chances of an athlete who has not used synthetic growth hormone testing positive are comparable to the chance that that same athlete has of being struck by lightning during his or her lifetime. Mr. Chairman, the conservative nature of the threshold has been borne out by nearly 13,000 growth hormone isoform tests that have been performed globally. There have been 11 positive tests, and 8 of those individuals admitted use. The remaining 3 cases are in various stages of arbitration and appeal at this time. In addition, Major League Baseball has conducted approximately 1,700 growth hormone isoform tests in its minor league players during the season and for the major league players during spring training. 1 minor league player tested positive and admitted growth hormone use. Since 2008, USADA has conducted 1,387 growth hormone isoform tests. Of these tests, 99% were well below the decision limit that's been established. It's been suggested by the NFL Players Association that NFL players are sufficiently different from other elite athletes with regard to size and ethnicity that an additional population study be done. Mr. Chairman, in my scientific opinion, an additional population study is unnecessary because each of the concerns that have been expressed have already been raised and answered by the growth hormone experts. Does the current test take the size of athletes into account? Yes. And it was determined that the size of an individual has no relation to the ratio of growth hormone isoforms measured by the test. Does the test accurately take into account growth hormone isoform ratio differences that may be attributed to an athlete's race or ethnicity? Yes. And the conservative approach that I described reflects that consideration. Does the test take into consideration the effect of strenuous exercise on growth hormone isoforms? Yes. To the extent growth hormone isoform ratios are affected by exercise, it's been determined that it's minor and it disappears within 30 minutes of the end of exercise. In conclusion, I'd like to point out that the only people who are still questioning the methodology and validity of the growth hormone isoforms test are lawyers, not scientists. The test has been not only put into use in Olympic sport, but in Major League Baseball as well. The experts who work in the growth hormone field every day, both inside and outside of the anti-doping community, have universally accepted and recognized that the isoforms test is scientifically reliable and appropriate for the detection of growth hormone abuse in sport. Once again, I'd like to express my thanks and my appreciation to the committee for having me here to testify.
Thank you. Mr. Butkus.
Thank you, Representatives Isom and Cummings, and members of the committee. I appreciate you holding this hearing on HGH testing. First, I applaud the NFL and players for taking a bold and decisive position on HGH in their 10-year agreement. Now let's get on with it. The HGH testing process is proven to be reliable. It's time to send a clear message that performance-enhancing drugs have no place in sports, especially the NFL. Now, as a sports enthusiast, I know you need both a great offense and a great defense to win. The defense is tough league testing and continued crackdown on drug suppliers. The offense is education and practical guidance. For the last 7 years, my son Matt and I have been playing offense. We've reached out to thousands of active teens across the country, encouraging them to play clean. That means eating well, training hard, and playing with attitude, instead of using performance-enhancing drugs. Now, we've made some progress, but our work is far from over. Today, we have about 400,000 teens who report that they have experimented with performance-enhancing drugs, many in middle school, and 1/3 are young women. We also discovered that 5 of 6 teens have never received education about performance-enhancing drugs or their consequences. But once teens hear that they are illegal, mess up your body development, and ruin their chances to play at the next level, they make smart decisions. Now, the work is to equip teenage athletes and their parents and coaches with programs making it easier to train and eat well. We need to make it easier to do the right thing. Plus, every year we have another 1 million or so teen athletes who need to be educated, along with their parents and coaches. None of our work on offense will matter unless we have a strong defense. The NFL and player agreement on HGH is a great playbook. Now let's get on the field and execute. The well-being of our nation's most active youth is riding on it, and they are paying attention to what happens in the NFL. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Goldberg.
Mr. Chairman and committee members, thank you for inviting me to this hearing. I'm a practicing physician and professor of medicine at the Oregon Health and Science University. I've been researching how to prevent performance-enhancing drug use among young athletes since 1987. My team of researchers found reasons young men and women use drugs like growth hormone or steroids are not the same, thus require different approaches. So we developed 2 NIDA-supported high school programs entitled Atlas for males and Athena for high school females. Both have reduced the use of anabolic steroids, illicit drugs, and alcohol, and have received national and international recognition for effectiveness. I was the principal investigator of the NIDA-sponsored Saturn study assessing the effectiveness of drug testing for high school athletes. Because other experts can testify as to the accuracy of the newer growth hormone tests, I'll focus my testimony on younger athletes' drug use and the potential messages a robust HGH program in professional sports might send to our youth. More than 55% of high school students participate in school-sponsored sports, and both male and female athletes report using performance-enhancing drugs. There are no reliable estimates as to the prevalence of human growth hormone use among adolescents. Also, the potential harmful effects of high doses of HGH are not known, although the disease may mimic the disease, the intake may mimic the disease acromegaly, where excess growth hormone is produced by a pituitary tumor. Furthermore, it's not yet clear that human growth hormone by itself is an athletic enhancer. However, many athletes believe it works and use it alone in combinations with anabolic steroids or other drugs. If the NFL has a reliable, robust testing program for HGH and the analysis is accurate, testing could make professional football fairer, if not healthier. However, the message to young athletes may not only show that the NFL does not tolerate drug use, But other messages may be present as well. One, that HGH actually enhances athletic performance, and two, there's a need to test elite athletes because so many are users. Teens don't always respond to adult messages as they're intended. The CDC estimates that over 1/2 million high school students report steroid use. This means there are more high school steroid users than total number of athletes in the NFL, Major League Baseball, the NBA, and NHL combined, multiplied by 100. Thus, the most profound performance-enhancing drug problem by numbers of users is among high school students, not the pros. While drug testing may weed out users in professional sports, for young athletes it's critical to prevent drug use. In our own study of student-athlete drug testing, there was no deterrent effect. So if drug testing is in an athlete's own school does not deter his or her use, why would testing in professional sports deter high school drug use? The way to reduce performance-enhancing drug use by young athletes is to implement programs proven to work. Recognizing this, the NFL is doing just that. The NFL Youth Football Fund has sponsored Atlas and Athena to over 40,000 young athletes throughout the United States. Moreover, the NFL has provided funds to both the Taylor Hooton and Efraim Marrero Foundations to better inform students and parents about these drugs. It's important to stress that Congress passed the Anabolic Steroid Control Act in 2004, authorizing $15 million per year for 6 years to enable DHHS to distribute science-based education programs in elementary and secondary schools to prevent steroid use. Although funds were authorized, Congress did not appropriate funding. Consequently, in 2009, the NFL, MLB, USADA, the USOC, and the National Federation of State High Schools sent a joint letter to all members of Congress requesting appropriation of funds to educate children about steroids. However, not one penny was appropriated. Instead, there have been multiple high-profile hearings on steroids in prominent steroid court cases costing the government tens of millions of dollars in failed attempts to convict just 2 Major League Baseball players. Additionally, according to the GAO, well over $1 billion was wasted on the Federal anti-drug campaign, where greater campaign exposure appeared to make things worse. Drug testing may be needed in an effort to keep professional sports more drug-free and fair, but testing elite athletes will not prevent drug use among teens. If Congress thinks adolescent use of performance-enhancing drugs is a problem, then do something about it. The notion that HGH testing in professional sports will trickle down to young athletes, causing them to be drug-free without strong science-based education, is not only naive, it may send a message that you need to use drugs to succeed. Programs that actually work are available. Because Congress approved but did not appropriate funds, we would like to give our Atlas and Athena programs back to the Federal Government so schools can use them for free. Thank you.
Mr. Gimbel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for inviting us, Congressman Cummings. My name is Mike Gimbel. I'm Director of the University of Maryland St. Joseph Medical Center Powered by Me anti-drug athlete program. We've been around for 5 years. More than that, I come from a different place here today. I'm also a recovering addict, being clean 40 years. I'm also a competitive marathon runner. Proud to say I've run the Boston Marathon 8 years out of the last 10. I work with kids every day. I love sports, I love working with kids, and I hate what drugs are doing to these kids. We are addicted in our society. We have an addiction to winning, winning at all cost. The kids I work with tell me that they will do anything to win. That means play injured, that means cheat, and it means take drugs, because the goal, the addiction, is to win. And we have an obsession in our nation to win. And these children are starting at an early age following the same pattern of addiction that we see with other drugs. We have 9, 10-year-old kids who are drinking gallons of energy drinks in order to get an edge. Kids, when they're 12 or 13, will spend thousands of dollars on unregulated supplements, muscle supplements, diet supplements, in order to get bigger and stronger and faster. And then when they get to high school, where it's really competitive and winning is really important, they go to the hard stuff. And that's when they start looking for HGH, anabolic steroids, anything they can get their hands on because they have to win. And we have enablers, coaches, parents, who support this, who watch this, who need to get involved. And we are in denial, as we are with other addictions, because we love winners. The message to our kids is that you have to win. Now, we have seen with other addictions that we have to have an attack that's three-pronged of education and treatment and enforcement. The education, you've heard there's programs out there that work. What we haven't talked much about is treatment. People that use these supplements will get addicted, whether it's just psychologically or whether it's physically as well. We have to get them help. And finally, in enforcement, what we have certainly found in other drug issues is that drug testing is important. Drug testing does two things. It helps to deter some athletes from using, and it also helps us identify those who are chronic users who then we can identify and get help. So testing is critical, not just for HGH, but for any substance that we can identify that will help us make our sports and our athletes play safer and fair and drug-free. That's the message. We look at the message that these kids get from their role models. We know that professional athletes are role models. They know that they're role models. Just in the last couple of weeks, we have watched tragedy after tragedy in the NFL. There are lots of other people who have died in car crashes, in domestic violence cases, and carried weapons. But it wasn't on the news the way it was with the NFL and professional sports. That's how powerful it is. That's the message that goes to our children. So we need to attack this the way we have attacked every other addiction, because winning can't be everything, because there aren't all winners all the time. Sometimes you lose. We have to teach that. What you heard up here with the panel, everyone agrees. We have to work with parents, we have to work with coaches, and we have to send a new message, not a mixed message, but a new message that you play safe, you play fair, you play drug-free, you do the best you can, you use your God-given talents, and if you win, great, and if you lose, great. You tried, you did your best, and that's the message we need to send. We're proud of the work we've done. We certainly thank our Congressman Cummings, who has helped us and gave us guidance and support for 5 years. We've reached 30,000 kids, but there's a lot out there that we need to reach. And I think what Mr. Butkus said is true, that we just have to get to as many kids as possible. I want to thank you for inviting me and supporting our efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. I now ask unanimous consent that the gentlelady from Wyoming be allowed to attend and participate in this hearing. Ms. Loomis, without objection, so ordered.
Thank you.
By the way, she'll be joining the committee in the next Congress, so this may be the only time I have to wave her on. I'll now recognize myself for a brief round of questions. First of all, Dr. Goldberg, I share with you your concern that we have to do all these other things. I hope today that we can all focus on this portion of it. It is not uncommon that that Congress authorizes and then doesn't appropriate. Hopefully, Mr. Butkus and others can illuminate us on an awful lot of things the NFL, players, owners are doing, in which they're spending far greater money, and hopefully that makes up for the stinginess of Congress, which is not famous right now, but $1 trillion of deficit from now, it might become famous. Dr. Bowers, you've certainly looked at the decades of the testing of human growth hormones and other substances. And when people say it's like being struck by lightning, I want to make sure I understand. Is there a chance that we will get a false positive on the margin on a football player if we begin testing all of them?
Well, no test is perfect, but again, in 1,400 tests that we've done at USADA, there hasn't been a single false positive test. So the odds are extraordinarily low.
And my understanding of the contract is that there's an appeal process and union protection if, in fact, somebody claims to have a false positive. You've looked at other athletes and so on. Are the protections, in your opinion, sufficient if there is an accusation of a false positive?
Yes, I think the adjudication process is the appropriate place to discuss a particular test result, and there's opportunity to deal with the issues there, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Butkus, a lot has changed since your time on the gridiron, but I suspect you're acutely aware of all of the physicians, trainers, people who administer both on and off the field in professional sports. In your opinion, is that well regulated and, in fact, already, if you will, creating an environment in which there's tremendous enhancement of the players? And I ask this for a reason. This committee is also concerned about the injuries, both at the professional and collegiate level. Isn't it true that, in fact, without human growth hormones, if we really eradicate it in steroids, don't we also have in the NFL probably the greatest level of legal enhancement that anyone could possibly imagine, whether it's fluids or it's the actual training or every other piece of science that's available but legal?
Well, I would hope so. I can only go back to the years when I was playing. You got to understand.
Well, you were pretty enhanced. We have to know how.
Well, a thing inside my chest, I think it was. But you would think that the owners in the NFL, with the amount of money that they're paying today, would have the best doctors available for their people. Unfortunately, I don't think that was true back in the 60s when I played, because there was a lot of friendships. And I don't know, I'd go as far as say if I was maybe went to a different doctor, I might have been played a couple more years. So you got to understand what they're doing today with all the advancements of nutrition and training techniques and everything else. You would think that each NFL team would make would make the effort to get the best possible. I mean, when I was playing, we could never go to another doctor. The players today, they can go anywhere they want, any specialist they want, and they usually do. So I would think that to avoid injuries and everything else, they're going to happen. But if you train properly and eat well, like we tell the kids, and from I Play Clean, you can get just as much out of the sport as you can.
Well, now, Dr. Goldberg made an opening statement that I think is worth asking you to respond to. If, in fact, the NFL lives up to its contract, the players live up to their contract, do we send a powerful message, in your opinion, that could reduce or eliminate the pretense, if you will, at the college level and hopefully at the high school level for using these kinds of drugs, knowing that the testing will prevent it for sure when they get to the pros?
Well, absolutely. I mean, where have you been? The NFL is a very powerful group. I mean, I'm in front of the public a lot this past couple years. And why would a kid come to me and ask for an autograph or talk about the Bears? I'm 70 years old. You mean to tell me that my playing in the NFL doesn't have an effect on the kids today? Come on.
Well, thank you.
What they do in the NFL by testing it, and believe me, I believe a lot of them want it. Nobody wants to be playing and have that shadow hanging over. Well, did he or didn't he take the juice? Did he or didn't he? I think they all want it. Majority of them want to do the testing. So why it's held up, I don't know.
I might only make one comment, and you can respond, and I will give equal time to the ranking member. The value of graduating from high school as a star and going to college, if there's testing in the college for steroids and human growth hormone, and you get cut from the team because you can't perform the next year the way you did before, is pretty minimal, isn't it? Basically, 1 year at college doesn't get you there. And the same is true if you get to the pros and suddenly you're being tested and you can't perform the way you did the year before. Could you comment a little bit on essentially the disincentive, if you know you're going to be tested at the next level, to even try to use it at the previous level to get that 1 year?
Well, I testified in Texas for high school testing, and a lot of the results were, well, you know, there was 100,000 kids tested and only 2 turned up positive. Well, it could have been maybe more, but because of the testing. So I believe it's good for high school kids to be tested. It's a deterrent, I would think. Now, I got to be educated, and that's what we try to do, is educate these kids that, listen, you know, you want to try this stuff, like you girls, you want to try this stuff and end up with a mustache and talking like a guy? Think about it. And the guys, do you want to play at the next level? Because you might get by here in high school, but they're going to nab you in college. Why would you risk that if this is your real goal? And so, again, I go back to educating them. I mean, who's to say if I was a player back then and I thought, well, this is going to give me an edge and everything else, that I wouldn't do it? I mean, I hear about it all the time in different sports. They do it to have a great year. Lo and behold, it happens to be their last year of the contract. And then the next year they sign a big one, and they go right in the toilet because they get off of it. So I think it is a deterring factor for high schools.
I thank you. I now recognize the ranking member for his questions.
Mr. Buskis, I want to follow up on the Chairman's questions. First of all, I want to thank you. You said you're 70 years old? Yeah. And
Right.
There's so many things you could be doing, but you decided to touch the future. And I just want you to know we all appreciate that. And that leads me to this. You know, in my district, the kids, I live in the inner city of Baltimore, and most of the kids in my neighborhood, they'll never get to an NFL game. You know why? Can't afford it. And when you hear about these players, and I mean, more power to them, making millions upon millions of dollars, agree to take a test. Agree now. And 2 years later, no test, and complaining about the science, and you just heard the doctors and what they said about the science. You know, I mean, what do you think that sends to? I mean, and you're trying to convince kids not to go that route, but what message do you think that sends to those very kids that you are trying to help?
Well, the message is that, like they have stated, it's in the hands of lawyers instead of scientists. I mean, I really believe that the majority of the players, if not all of them, welcome the test. I mean, I would. I mean, not because I wouldn't take the stuff, but it's just that I want to know that I'm playing on an even field here.
Yeah.
Because there's big rewards, like you say, with the money and endorsements and everything else. I mean, when I see a mother, you know, talking about her kid, and I'm trying to talk to the 10-year-old kid, and the mother is saying, ask him how to be a pro, ask him what to eat, ask him, and I turn to her and I say, ma'am, I don't want to bust your bubble here, but little Johnny here has got about 1 chance in a million to make it. Why don't you just let him play for fun? Oh, no, he's going to make it. So you got to educate not only the kids, the players, the coaches, and the parents. The parents, we all know that. But getting back to your question, I think the majority of them want to be tested. They agreed to the agreement. So whatever the ramifications are that they're worried about the reliability, I think these gentlemen up here have certainly made it clear. Other than that, I don't know. I really think they want to play on an even field. I know I would.
Mr. Gimbel, part of our goal here today is to ensure that the health and safety of professional athletes while ensuring fairness and integrity in the game. But we are also concerned about the millions of young people that participate in middle school, high school, college athletics across the country. What message does it send to young athletes that play the sports when NFL players don't get tested? I mean, what does that say?
Well, I
and
think
you talked about being addicted to winning. Are you, from what you know and listening to the doctors, and I'm sure you've done your own research on this, I mean, do you have doubts about the accuracy of the test?
No, I don't have any doubts about the accuracy of the test. I think we've all done our homework to know about it. The same with other testing that's done. And I think the importance, you know, when Dick was saying about reaching parents and the attitude of parents who believe that every child is going to be a star, and the reality is that kids have lost the fun of playing sport because it is about winning. And that pressure starts so young that these kids are looking for an edge. The little skinny kid is looking for an edge because he's been told by his parents or the coach, you better bulk up. And then they look up at the colleges and they look up at the pros and they see their role models, one getting busted, you know, two getting in trouble, you know, three getting injured over and over. And they look at that and, yeah, that has an impact. But they also look at the fact that their way of getting there might be through drugs, because that's going to get them the scholarship. That's going to get them out of the ghetto. That's going to get them out of the neighborhood. That's going to get them their chance. And they're willing, and this is what they say, you know, if winning is everything, they'll do anything to win.
Just one,
and that's the scary part.
One last question. Dr. Bowers, I keep going back to what you said about lightning and the chances of being, what would you say, the chances of an athlete who has not used synthetic growth hormone testing positive are comparable to the chance of that same athlete being struck by lightning.
Correct.
That's incredible. So what you're saying is then, and I think you said 11 folks have been found?
That's correct. There have been 11 positive tests out of 13,000.
And so, are there any other tests? I know there are 2 tests now. Are there any other tests, Dr. Tabak or Dr. Bowers, in the pipeline that could even be more accurate? Just curious.
I wouldn't make the distinction of accurate, that all of the tests are accurate. The isoforms test that I described, the limitation of it is it has a very short detection window. Basically, 2 days after you take the drug, it's undetectable again. The other test that has been in development, the biomarkers test, probably detects the use of growth hormone out to 8 to 10 days afterwards. So the 2 tests are complementary. They're both accurate. They just test for different times after the person takes the drug.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. We now recognize the I wasn't a player, just a place kicker for 5 minutes, Mr. Chaffetz. By the way, you haven't looked at George Blanda at the end of his season. You're still always on the roster.
Well, the most important statistic for a kicker is we never lost a game by the margin of my missed kicks. Otherwise, I'd be in Arizona or California at this point in my life. But it was a great experience, and it's a great sport, and America loves it. And there are a lot of kids that look up to the people that engage, and to Mr. Butkus and the others that have gone through a lot of pain in playing the roughest, one of the roughest sports around. The public enjoys it, but we've got to send the right message to the youth. So, Mr. Chairman, the Ranking Member Cummings, and to the 5 members who are testifying here today, I appreciate your passion and your willingness to testify on this issue, the importance of this issue, that we as the country make sure that our youth in particular and others don't go down the wrong direction. I do want to make sure, though, that we inform the public of the distinction between the synthetic recombinant human growth hormone injections that artificially raise growth hormone levels and keep them unnaturally elevated for periods of long time, versus perhaps a dietary supplement that provides nutritional support to the pituitary to produce optimum youthful levels of natural HGH release that flows in the body's natural rhythms. And I think the testimony here today does reflect in part the difference and the distinction between the synthetic recombinant human growth hormones and maybe some of the other more natural levels of HGH. In fact, I'd ask unanimous consent. There's a company that's in my state of Utah that wants to make sure that we're distinguishing the differences, and I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record their
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Dr. Bowers, two things. One is, in your testimony, you said that an additional population study is needed. My understanding is that the Players Association and the NFL have agreed to do this population study, so I don't think that that is necessarily applicable. My other part of it is a question. The tests that you're performing, have those been peer-reviewed? By who have they been peer-reviewed, and how were they peer-reviewed?
So peer review takes a number of forms. One of the ways can be publication, and I mentioned that the test, there have been 4 publications about this test that are in the literature. That's one form of peer review. Another form of peer review is to get a group of scientific experts together around the table, present data, have them talk about it, and then go forward with their recommendations. And that also has been done with growth hormone over the last, like I said, since 1999 we started.
But specific to the test that you're doing?
Yes, all of those things have happened specific to the test that I've talked about.
And have you given all of that to the NFL and to the Players Association? Do they have access to that, all of it?
Yes, they do.
But my understanding is that perhaps they don't. And so just as a point of clarification for the record, my understanding is you'll provide all of that information that we just talked about to both the Players Association and to the NFL.
We offered, USADA offered to go to talk with the player representatives and show them all the data that USADA has, asked her any questions that they have, and they never took us up on it.
And is there anything that you wouldn't show them?
That I have accessible?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Okay. All right. I thank you all. Again, I appreciate this. I think it's an important topic, and I hope that they continue to execute. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Would the gentleman yield?
Sure, sure.
I just want to sort of come back to what Mr. Cummings started on. If you were to look below the current levels, the threshold, the very conservative threshold, is it likely that some of those who would not test positive are in fact doping? In other words, I want to understand, not only is it a lightning question, but isn't it true that in some cases, because it's such a short window, basically somebody dopes 3 days before, you're seeing it, but you're not considering it a false. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, the threshold has been set intentionally very high, and when you do that, you're accepting a number of what would be false negatives. So the people are actually using it, but you're saying, I'm willing to exclude that just so we don't get anyone having a false positive.
And just one follow-up. It also means that under the current testing, they can juice in the off season and get away with it. This is a relatively limited testing period in which they're really only being tested during the playing season, if you will. Isn't that correct? In other words, it's not year-round testing.
Yeah, I'm not totally familiar with what the NFL does. Certainly for USADA, 90% of our growth hormone tests have been no notice out of competition.
Right, your random test.
Yep.
So this one, as I understand, is less aggressive. With that, we go to the, well, let's see. I got to get all the way, there we go. We go to the gentleman from Missouri who was patiently not leaving the dais.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for conducting this hearing. Recently, the NFL Players Association raised questions about the science that underlies the HGH test. arguing that it should not be applied to NFL athletes. This HGH test has been used at the Olympics since 2004. Dr. Tabak, correct me if I'm wrong, but WADA is recognized as the scientific leader in this field, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And despite the variations in size and body types that exist among NFL players, there are Olympic equivalents that span the full range. For example, six-time Pro Bowl wide receiver Randy Moss is 6'4" and weighs 215 pounds. Gold medalist sprinter Usain Bolt stands at 6'5" and 210 pounds. In fact, the sports reporters in this room may remember that Bolt was flirting with the idea of trying out for the NFL. Mr. Buckus, I don't know about you, but I don't see any conceivable relevant difference between these two athletes. Do you?
Nope, not really.
So what is it that the NFL players are talking about here? What is, I mean, why are they saying there's a distinction, or that they have a that size and body types are different?
I really don't know. I'm just saying that they're being represented by their union, and that, you know, one false positive can mean a guy's reputation. So, but like again, I say, I bet you the majority, all of them, want to be tested.
Another example is 2012 weightlifting bronze medalist Ruslan Albagov, who at 6'4", 324 pounds, is roughly the same size as 11-time Pro Bowl lineman Larry Allen, who is 6'3" and 324 pounds. Dr. Bowers, again, I don't see any relevant difference between these two athletes. What do you think?
Well, I agree, and I can even add a little more to that. If I look at the top 1%, the highest growth hormone test results that we've seen, the three sports that were involved were bobsled, a driver, cycling, and 3 track and field sprinters. None of them are particularly big individuals, so the highest test isn't correlated at all to body size.
Can you talk about the test for growth hormone in sport and the research that went into its development?
I can. The search for a test for growth hormone abuse started back in 1996. It split into 2 different paths, one of which is the test we're discussing today, which is the isoforms test. And that test was based on the fact that when people were given growth hormone, this test could discriminate or classify people correctly into users and non-users. The other test, having recognized that a 2-day window was probably not going to be the best solution for us, the other test is a biomarkers test. And that basically is an indication of the effect of growth hormone on the body. And so since those effects last much longer than growth hormone's actually there, the window of detection is much broader. And those are the 2 tests that are currently under development.
And did the trials include a wide range of individuals with a wide range of body types?
Yes, it did. And
has the test also gone through the peer review process? And what were the results of that process?
So, as I mentioned, the isoforms test has had 4 publications related to the test itself. They're published in the peer-reviewed literature. The biomarkers test has had more than 33 publications laying the background for the test, and again, those are all in the peer-reviewed literature. So quite a bit of research has been done over the last, 15 years.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Chairman, just yesterday, in fact, the committee received a letter from Scott Blackman, the CEO of the U.S. Olympic Committee, stating that, quote, given the stringent review process, the USOC has the utmost confidence in the WADA-approved testing methods to detect HGH, and I ask unanimous consent to enter this letter into the
Without objection, so ordered.
so
I thank
much.
the gentleman. We now go to the distinguished gentleman from Tennessee, Dr. Desjardins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. I want to take this just a little in a little different direction than we've gotten to so far. As a practicing physician for 20 years before coming to Congress, I think that we're kind of overlooking to some extent the source of the problem here. And to my knowledge, HGH is not something you can go down to GNC and get. HGH is going to have to be prescribed by a physician. I know from my experience, and I have had patients come in who were undersized off the growth chart at young ages when they're hitting puberty, and those discussions have occurred whether it's appropriate to use this hormone. And generally that is a problem that's referred on to an endocrinologist. Now, I guess what is confusing to me here is why is this so readily accessible, and who are the doctors who are providing this for the wrong reasons, and why is the punishment not starting there, and then maybe we don't have to worry as much about it. I know bad things will happen as long as there's bad people or bad players in the game. Can anyone enlighten me on what the punishment history has been for physicians prescribing HGH? Dr. Goldberg?
Many of the kids who get both HGH or think they're getting HGH or anabolic steroids get them from the Internet. If you put in buy HGH or buy steroids, you can get many, many thousands and thousands of hits, and you can send away for vials of steroids or human growth hormone. Whether they're in reality human growth hormone or steroids is questionable, and they've been looked at. Many of them are phony. But from Eastern Europe, you can get those. They're readily available.
Without a doctor's prescription, or do they just forge them?
Oh, without a doctor's prescription.
Okay, so there's a certain, yes, Mr. Gimbel?
The other issue here is the fact that many athletes, pro, college, certainly high school, are going to health food stores, GNC stores, buying tons of muscle supplements, which are not regulated. The FDA does not regulate that industry. In surveys that have been done randomly over the years, many of these products have had HGH and anabolic steroids in them. We just don't know. You know, the fact is these products are working, and they're working so well. My assessment and many other professionals is something is not right, and it needs to be regulated. So we've got a whole industry from energy drinks up to what you buy in these stores or on the Internet. It's not regulated. So it's a real kind of a Russian roulette crapshoot when it comes to what these kids are buying, which are probably getting more from the Internet and these stores than they are from their doctors.
Dr. Goldberg?
Well, you can't get HGH from a pill. You can get anabolic steroids, and the IOC did a study of U.S. supplements in 2003. It was published that 18.6% of supplements, of 240 supplements analyzed, had true anabolic steroids in them. Of course, that wasn't on the label, but because they're not regulated, they can put those in to make them work.
Okay. And I know creatine has become a big problem as an over-the-counter supplement. I know I have a son, Mr. Butkus, who played linebacker in his senior year this year, was 140 pounds. As you said, he's not going to the next level. But as much as he and his other teammates wanted to continue to use creatinine, I told them the perils of this, and yet at halftime or all throughout the game, they're laying on the sideline getting their cramps stretched out, whether it's their calves or hamstrings. In college football, we see players routinely going into the locker room at halftime getting IV fluids. That's probably not something that was as common in your day, and this is because this dehydrates and causes these muscles to cramp. So it shows, even as a physician and a father, I could not influence my own son from going off to GNC and taking this. And so that is a big challenge. How do we do a better job? I know that you've been working on it.
Well, I guess we just got to keep on pounding the pavement and educate them. The parents, I mean, I come across a Pop Warner coach. He comes up to me and he says, you know what, I finally had to have a meeting with my parents of my 9-year-olds. I said, really? I said, about what? He says, well, just before the game, the parents make them go back in the parking lot and they chug down energy drinks. At 9 years old, I'm saying, I'm trying to reach high school kids. You mean to tell me I got to go to grammar school now? Sure. Or the case of telling that story to another Pop Warner coach that came by, and he says, that's nothing, Dick. I actually caught a mother giving a 9-year-old a laxative so he could make his weight at 9 years old.
Wrestling, that happens for sure. Just as a point of personal privilege, I have to tell you that I've gotten over my grudge against you. Growing up in South Dakota, I was an avid Viking fan, and I was not upset when you retired in '73, but that's been 40 years ago, and I've gotten over it.
That's probably why you've been so successful. Thank you.
40 years, that's all it takes? You notice I haven't gotten over losing the Browns to Baltimore. But 40 years might do it. With that, we now go next to, oh, wait a second, I want to make sure I get this just right. Mr. Quigley, who was here at the start.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your having this hearing and our panelists, your participation. Those watching this know that the House has a long history of having hearings about performance-enhancing drugs in sports, some of them famous, some of them infamous. But what struck me in looking at this meeting was that it used to be that Major League Baseball was behind, right? Now it's the only major sport testing for HGH. So if the MLB Association and the Commissioner and the teams can agree on this, it makes no sense to me that the National Football League can't as well. I just want to go into the weeds a little bit with anybody on the panel that wants to help. The way you take HGH is in a sequence, correct? So you're on this for a while, and then you're off this for a while. I'd like a little nuance here, what that means in terms of why one of these two tests is preferred, given what you mentioned earlier about the fact that there's a gap where the test only lasts for a short period of time.
Well, there's not a preference for one versus the other. They're complementary. So when we get them both validated, then we will use both of them. A good example was we had the biomarkers test used at the games in London this summer, and 2 athletes in the Paralympics in powerlifting tested positive by the biomarkers test and did not test positive by the isoforms test. And the reason was they admitted to using growth hormone about 8 days before. Now, unfortunately, since the Olympic Games, one of the companies that was supplying the kits that we were using for the biomarkers test has taken it off the market. And so until we can validate another procedure for that particular test, we can't use it.
In other words, is anyone doing the biomarkers test now at all?
The only lab that was approved to do it was the London lab for the Olympics. To the best of my knowledge, there are no other labs that have been approved to use that test.
And again, but back to what I mentioned before, and that's the sequence in which an athlete would take human growth hormone. This is a period in which they'd go on, and there's a period in which they'd naturally go off, and how does that affect the timing of testing?
Well, again, both of the tests are really best used in what we call no advance notice, random or out of competition testing. So testing on game day, for example, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I would be doing my testing away from that when people are training and at a time when they don't know that they're going to be tested. That makes both tests most effective.
But they take take this for how long a period, and then how long are they off it typically?
The answer is it depends, but they would take a cycle that might be every day for several weeks and then stop. So anytime you got them during the period of time that they were taking it, the test would probably be positive. There are some athletes who that we've interviewed that say they take it for weight loss. Those people use it slightly differently than what I just described, so it'd be a little more difficult to to find them, and if you were going to schedule a test in advance, for example.
Mr. Gimba, who advises these athletes, or who's out there that are these masterminds? how do they find the athletes or vice versa to get such, you have to admit, at least some sophistication in understanding how to take this, if at all, safely, and then in what sequence?
Well, one of the things we have found over the years is that there's a lot of money involved here. And there are lots of companies who are interested in getting to athletes and selling their products and teaching them how to do it. You may remember years ago, we were into this cycle with the Balco lab, where every time the government would ban a certain chemical in a steroid, they would go back and change it. Because, again, it's supply and demand. It was a market for the product. People were willing to pay. There's an underground, there's trainers, there's people who will teach athletes how to do things the wrong way. Because, again, their goal is to play as long as they can, be as strong as they can, as fast as they can, recover from their injury. There's a lot of money at stake. So there are people that will teach them. We have found, whether it's a trainer, whether it's a coach, there are people that will teach the other side as much as we're trying to teach how to do it the right way.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I also represent Wrigley Field and actually look out over Wrigley Field from my house. And you didn't have to be a fan of the Bears or the Vikings or the Packers or whomever to appreciate what Mr. Butkus did on that field to make this game great. And I thank all for participating.
Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. We now recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Science, Mr. Chairman, is the reason some of us went to law school, so I am not going to be asking any questions rooted in science.
So the gentleman is not that kind of lawyer?
No, sir. I was not, and I'm not any kind now. But I do want to ask some questions concerning reliability, because if memory serves me correctly, you can be suspended from the NFL for certain criminal offenses. And I'm wondering if there are any studies on the reliability of jury verdicts that the Players Association is insisting on before you can suspend someone for suffering a criminal conviction. Hearing no response, I think you can also be suspended, Mr. Butkus, for certain tackles or certain conduct on the field, which requires either Mr. Goodell or Mr. Tagliabue to ascertain someone's intent, whether or not they had a malicious intent to injure before you can be suspended. And I'm wondering on whether or not the Players Association is insisting on some tests studying the reliability of ascertaining people's malice or mental intent.
That wasn't going on when I was playing. There were no rules.
I'm not aware of any test now where they have scientifically tested Mr. Goodell's ability to ascertain people's intent when they go to tackle someone. But here's the big issue to me. You can be suspended for trafficking an HGH. That would be a crime. So you can be suspended for that, right? What test would they use in court? If you can be suspended for the conviction, and that test is good enough for the Players Association, why can't that same test be good enough in this realm? Not all at once. Is there a different test you would use if there were a prosecution for an NFL player for trafficking an HGH, and we all agree they could be suspended for suffering that conviction, right? How is the test that would be used in court to determine whether or not it was HGH any different from the test that's being proposed now?
Well, there's a slight difference, but I agree totally with your comments that, you know, it's inconsistent, and it seems appropriate that you do the test that you agreed to do.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that there was a clause in the CBA. Over the next several weeks, the two parties would develop specific arrangements to implement HGH testing with the goal of beginning testing by the first week of the 2011 regular season. Has anyone been able to determine what the intent of the Players Association was when they agreed to that language? Was there a test they had in mind when they agreed to that? Is the chairman aware? Is there any test that they would find acceptable?
If the gentleman would yield.
Yes, sir.
In the previous season, the ranking member and I had a proposed deal in which they would simply collect the samples so that when they agreed to this, eventually they would at least have a collection of essentially retroactive evidence. We had an agreement. They left. The agreement fell apart. They refused to have even the collection. So I guess I'd have to tell the gentleman that one of our frustrations is they wouldn't even agree to eventually have a test once they agreed to it. And that's been one of the frustrations is ranking member and I personally met and thought we had an agreement, and it then got reneged on by one side, and to our, I think the detriment of the players' well-being.
Well, I'll close with this, Mr. Chairman, because I just can't unlock this conundrum. You pick your favorite player. Mine would happen to be a Dallas Cowboy, but pick your favorite player can be suspended from the NFL if they suffered a conviction for trafficking in HGH. After a court case, after due process, if they're convicted, they can be suspended. How is the test that would be used to lead to that conviction different than what is being proposed in this setting? If it's good enough for that way to be suspended, why is it not good enough for this way? Is the science somehow different in a courtroom than it is outside the courtroom?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
I would welcome the opportunity to ask the Players Association that question, but I won't get it today, so I would yield back.
I thank the gentleman and thank him for his insightful questions. With that, we go to the gentleman from the north of Virginia, Mr. Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to our panelists for being here today. Mr. Butkus, I want to assure you, 70 is the new 40. Cool. Just like 60 or 62 is the new 30. Better be. And Mr. Butkus, maybe I could begin with you. You talked passionately about your awareness of the fact that as an athlete, as a professional athlete, you are and have been a role model for a lot of young people. And you took that responsibility to heart. Among your colleagues, including those who are current players, is it your sense that most players understand that and take it seriously?
I would hope so, but I can't say it's across the board. I would only say that, as far as I'm concerned, football was meant everything for me, and it's payback time. It's give back.
Yeah.
And that's what we try to instill. We use the Butkus Award for the most outstanding in linebackers as a vehicle to play clean. Anybody that's eligible gets a letter from us. Take the pledge that you will play clean. And that's all we can do. And, we reach millions of kids. And that's just one of my ways of giving back. I don't know. It's been tough, though. I would pick one of the most difficult things because of what Mr. Gimbel was saying about this deal about winning.
Yeah. Yeah, because, Mr. Cummings was talking about kids in his district in the Baltimore area, many of whom are low income, can't afford to ever go to an NFL game, but they're very aware of NFL players as role models, and if they're taking drugs, the rest of us can say till we're blue in the face, just say no, stay clean, don't do it. But if their role models are doing it, it kind of vitiates the whole point.
I believe so.
The title of this hearing is HGH Testing in the NFL, Is the Science Ready? And I'm glad we're having a hearing that empowers science. Dr. Goldberg, is the science ready?
Well, that's really up to Dr. Bowers and the validity of the test. I mean, we look at sensitivity and specificity of testing, and this is a test, the way Larry describes it, is more like testing for alcohol. It's going to be very difficult to find positive tests, but when you find a positive test, it's probably a true positive. So that's what's important. If it's to weed out all users because it's cycled on and off, much like anabolic steroids are, half the time when you test, you're not going to find it, because and then if you're testing, only how frequently you're testing will determine whether you're going to pick up anybody or very few people. So if an athlete feels it enhances their performance, and that's the reason they're playing in the NFL or any other league, they'll take that chance to use it if they think, as one athlete told me, I'd rather be playing in the NFL than driving a truck in Idaho.
If I understand your testimony correctly, Dr. Goldberg, I thought you said, but maybe it was another panelist earlier, that the incident of false positives is next to nothing?
That's what I think
Larry
Larry
Dr. Bowers?
said that.
Yeah, that's correct. And as I said, there have been, worldwide, there have been 13,000 tests done. There have been 11 positives. 8 of the 11 admitted use. The other 3, you know, it's in the lawyer's court.
But if I can, yep. So if I'm understanding your testimony and that of Dr. Goldberg, we don't have a plethora of false positives, which would suggest the science of the testing is fairly accurate. But what we do have is an understatement of the use of HGH because of the regularity of testing, the randomness of it, the timing of it. So as a matter of fact, those 13 positive, or whatever the number, probably significantly understate the widespread use of HGH. Is that right?
I would agree with that.
You would agree with that. So the science isn't so much the question, and you haven't commented on that. Dr. Goldberg kind of passed that off to you, Dr. Bowers. Would you comment on the accuracy of the science? Are we ready? Is the science ready for this kind of testing in the NFL?
Yes. I mean, we had a question before, I think, about the peer review of this. I can tell you I organized a meeting in 2004. Of the 75 people that attended, 20 were growth hormone experts that had no association with sport. And based on the recommendation of that meeting in 2004, the test was implemented at the Olympics in Athens in 2004. So there definitely has been peer review. People have looked at this, discussed it, and have confidence in it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think the gentleman, would you yield for a second? Just
of
for
course.
I think the gentleman makes a great point that this test at best will be a little bit like police out on the freeway with radar guns. The vast majority of people drive over the speed limit and do not encounter a policeman, but on occasions they do, and the accuracy of the radar gun, sadly, is quite good.
And, Mr. Chairman, I will also add to that, if you are charged, it is not a defense in a court of law to say, well, everyone else was doing it too.
Exactly. The gentleman is correct.
Mr. Issa, right here, over here.
Wait. Oh, yes. Yes,
Can I
Dr.
make a
Goldberg.
comment?
I wasn't looking for you here.
When that analogy is a very good analogy with the speed, and everyone else, as you know, will slow down when that person is caught on the side. So
nothing slows you down more than those flashing lights with the other guy.
But then go down the road 3 more miles, and they're all speeding again.
The gentleman is correct. Of course, no one in this audience today is suggesting that police stop looking for speeders. And with that, we recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Dr. Gosar.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Buckus, I would like you to look up at the monitor, and we're going to look at a quote from London Fletcher, the middle linebacker for the Washington Redskins. Hopefully the NFL and the NFL Players Association will implement the new HGH test that has been endorsed by the international anti-doping officials. Next slide. Shows that another quote from free agent wide receiver Anthony Gonzalez. He seems to agree with London Fletcher. It's a huge step for our league, and I know talking to other guys in the locker room, they're in favor of it too. A lot of rules in the new CBA are safety-oriented, and this is as important or more important than anything else. Let's go to the next slide. It's a quote from Atlanta Falcons tackle Tyson Clabo, and he said, if guys start getting busted, then obviously there was a need, and I don't anticipate that there's going to be a large flux of guys getting caught because I don't see it really being a huge problem. But there's really only one way to find out, and that's to start testing. So for you, my question is, it really sounds like many of the players are in favor of it.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I haven't taken a survey, but I would believe they are.
And it seems to me that there's a Nike quote that really is applicable here. Just do it. You know, if there's enough players, you know, you overrule your player's rep and you just do it.
Well, you know, they've got a union and they're representing their players and what they think is right. And in this case, you have a player representative from the Falcons saying that let's move on with it. So let's get the testing done. And another one said that there might be a surprisingly few that'll come up positive. So you're right. Well, I don't know the answer to that. Again, I would just think they all want to sound like they all want to play on an even playing field.
Well, and it seems to me like we ought to be having their voices heard.
Probably more so than mine.
And I give no quarter. You know, in fact, I'm going to take it another step. I applaud you for how you look yourself as a role model, because I think there's a counter culture. And I think it exemplified in a comment that came from Charles Barkley in regards to his aspect as a role model versus Karl Malone. And the dialogue was very intense, but so articulate. You know, I disagree with a lot of pro ball players. You know, I'm around enough of them to know that it's also about me, me, me.
True. And that goes along with what Mr. Gimbel's been saying, win, win, win at any cost. Like I said before, football, I mean, since I was 9 years old. And it has been very good to me. So it's a way to pay back. And as far as these other statements, I don't go around trying to be a hero, but I don't know what happens. But if people are going to listen to something positive that I may say or help kids with, then I got to take that obligation and do it. I mean, believe me, I don't feel great sitting here doing this. I'm a former player, but what we got to do is we got to think about the kids. And I realize that kids are looking up. I mean, to say that they're not is, Jesus, look at fantasy football. I mean, come on. What other event in the world stops besides something tragic than the Super Bowl? Come on.
I agree.
You know? So it's, I don't know. I'm just doing my little part. I appreciate what you're saying.
And I would appreciate a lot more of the NFL players to take notice and pick up that role of leadership and personal accountability and personal responsibility to that role. I got one more question to Dr. Tabak and Dr. Bowers. Have we seen any other studies that kids that do HGH and some of these other enhancement drugs, are they much more prone to be doing illicit other drugs?
So, unfortunately, there are very few studies that speak to HGH per se amongst the young. But anecdotally, one-off case reports, there is report of poly use, particularly with anabolic steroid.
I think this would be one that we would really like to follow up on because of compulsive behaviors. There's some type of tracking that's said here. Dr. Wilbur.
Yeah, there's multiple studies showing that those who take performance-enhancing drugs are polysubstance abusers. There's not just a case report. This is all over the world literature. So if you're going to reduce performance-enhancing drugs, you have to try and reduce alcohol and other drugs as well.
Yeah. I just as a point of personal privilege, I will say I was also one of those struggling Vikings fans growing up in western Wyoming, so we were really happy to see you retire. But thank you very much for the way you played and the way you hold your head very, very high. We appreciate that. Thank you.
God, you're rough. I thought Desjardins held a grudge. We now go to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Butkus, I'd like to follow up on the line of questioning Dr. Gosar just completed. We heard the quotes that he brought out from various players. We've heard from this panel pretty much unanimously indicating that the use of HGH has some potential side effects, and we've heard, and I think it's common sense, that we want our athletes to compete in a fair fashion without chemically induced advantages. So where is the resistance to this? Having been in the NFL and having been looking at it from the outside for some years, why aren't both sides saying, let's just get this done, be over with it, and take this problem off the table?
I don't know.
Anybody else on the panel?
I mean, I don't know why. I mean, there must be some doubt as far as the reliability, but these gentlemen have proven, or at least they got documentation that it is reliable. I have no idea why they wouldn't go along with it. Again, I think it's the lawyers involved.
Dr. Gimbel?
I think as we look at the bigger picture of substances that are being used by athletes, we talked earlier about the supplements that you can buy on the Internet, that you can buy in health food stores, that may or may not contain illegal substances. And I think a lot of athletes that I've talked with who have gotten caught through drug tests have said, all I did was go to GNC and buy some protein powder or some muscle product. I didn't know that it had anabolic steroids or whatever broke the rule. And I think there's some concern that this is a bigger issue. And I think some athletes may be concerned that they're going to do the right thing but also get caught doing something that might be wrong. So I think as we look at this, as I think the panel has been talking about, that the issue of unregulated supplements is a huge issue that needs to be addressed by the FDA.
And that's probably a can of worms that we don't have time to get into
Obviously.
today and is outside of the scope of this hearing. I do want to take another step back, and I don't want to diminish the negative impacts that these banned substances or any other substance has on our players after they retire, or our youth as they're moving forward. But I would also be concerned as to what is the appropriate role of the federal government in here. I realize it's fun to have football greats like Mr. Butkus in to testify. It's an honor to be in the same room with somebody I admired growing up. But isn't this something that might be better worked out without? Is there a way to work this out without the federal government being involved in it? And I'll entertain comments from anybody on the panel. Mr. Gimbel?
I would just like to say that several years ago when the first steroid hearings were held, I think it opened up a dialogue and opened up to the American people about performance-enhancing drugs in Major League Baseball at the time. And I think that was such an important role that this committee did because it gave us, who work with kids, a lot of leverage, a lot of knowledge, and it also woke up a lot of professional college, high school athletes, not only about the dangers, but the consequences. So I think there's a definite role in doing what this committee has been doing, which is dialogue and awareness and educating the public.
Well, you know, obviously protecting our kids is absolutely critical. But I do hear from people when I'm back home, you know, you're about to go off the fiscal cliff. What are you doing having a hearing on HGH? And so
let me just finish with this, just add this. If the public was aware of the number of our kids who are taking some level of these performance-enhancing drugs, they would be demanding these hearings. Because if it were cocaine or heroin or anything else, they would be saying, why aren't we doing something?
But haven't we done our part by making illegal their use, or are we just basically up here kind of trying to educate the public?
Well, I think that's a huge role. I think we're trying to clarify the questions and make it very clear what the role is of parents, of coaches, of the leagues, as well as the government, of what we're supposed to do and what we can and can't do, what we can control and what we can't.
Well, I see my time has expired. I'd like to thank you all for being here. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to
I thank the gentleman. Would you yield for a moment,
I will.
though? Perhaps I can answer one of your constituents' concerns before the ranking member does his closing, and that is that the one thing I get asked all the time is, can't Congress do more than one thing at a time? And so to a great extent, yes, there are leadership working on the cliff. There are committees working on what they're doing. And I think this committee, who wasn't even supposed to be in session this week, is trying to take full advantage of being here to do as many things as we can. And I might note that the gentleman has been incredibly helpful at looking at doing oversight on a lot of things that people may not have understood until we started finding out, for example, hydraulic fracturing was under attack and so on. So I want to thank the gentleman for multitasking in his life as well. Mr. Gowdy, before we go closing, did you want to do a second round for any reason?
No, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Then I would yield to the ranking member for his closing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Again, I want to thank all of you for being here today. You know, one of the things that I say to my kids, I tell them, Mr. Buckets, I tell them, try to figure out what is the enemy of your destiny. What is the enemy of your destiny? And because I believe that if they try to figure out what might block them from getting to where they've got to go, that they will begin to change those things now so they can get to where they're trying to go. I would hate to think that the enemy of our young people's destiny is them looking up to athletes who may be doing something improper, and then they try to emulate that, and the next thing you know, they find themselves in trouble. So a lot of people ask, why would the chairman and this committee look into these things? It's not that we want to be beaten up on the league or anything like that. We do care about our children, and we've had our chance, and that's one of the things I admire about all of you all. We've had our chance. The question is what chances are we blocking our children from having? And so your testimony has been very, very helpful, and hopefully as we move down the line, the players will see how incredibly ridiculous it looks for them not to. Maybe they need to talk to their lawyers. Let's put it like that, and straighten this thing out. We got to move off of this. We got to move down the line. We're now getting ready to go into a third season, and it does not look very good. I think too, part of responsibility is when you agree to something, carrying through with it. And if you can't carry through with it, at least show a good reason why you can't, and then make it. Show that there's a way forward. If you can get it done. Right now, we're not seeing that. But your testimony has been very, very helpful because you put on the record not only the science, but the effect that it has on our young people, and so and folks. So thank you very much, and thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Cummings. And I want to again thank our witnesses. Making the record is an important part of the process. Each of you has brought an insight. Mr. Butkus, even though you don't have a DR or a PhD in front or behind your name, I think your humbleness and your recognition that our recognition that your continued dedication to a clean sport added more than all the science perhaps can add to the human side of this hearing. For our scientists, I want to thank you for beginning the process of making it clear that a number, a contract, and a testing regime has to occur and can occur, and certainly has occurred in most of the rest of the sports world. So again, I want to thank you for your time as we go into the holiday season, and we stand adjourned.